record. Yeah. For the record.
Hey guys, welcome back to Thai Kicks for another video, and it's unfortunately a video with a different subject to normal. Now, don't get me wrong, my aim's not to kind of bring doom and gloom to anyone. All I can do is say that the situation with COVID-19 and the coronavirus globally is something that we're all dealing with, including me and my family. It's unavoidable. What we see online, the media, and obviously governments around the world are trying to do what they can to stop the spread of this particular virus. We are going to be talking on this week's episode of Thai Kicks about the effects that this is going to have on the sportswear industry as a whole, and as well retail, because it's going to be pretty massive. We've seen obviously stores closing, and we don't really know what is going to happen. Now, I've managed to get a really good friend of Thai Kicks on to give us some answers to those burning questions that we've all got related to what's going to be happening in the future. So I'd like to welcome Andy Wilson, aka the Sneaker Dog, to Thai Kicks to give us a little bit more insight about what's going on. He's been in the mix of stock market action and tracking different types of businesses, but obviously particularly the sneaker industry businesses as a whole. Nice to speak to you, Andy.
Hi there, thank you very much for having me on, Ty. Certainly a lot to discuss with regards to this coronavirus and the impact not only on the industry of sneakers and retail as a whole, but actually the ramifications for most industries on the planet, some worse than others, but obviously also the human impact as well, which is very, very important that we don't forget.
So Andy, I've kind of wrote down a few burning questions that I've had since this has all really blown up in the last week or so. From obviously something that wasn't massively serious to something extremely serious for all of us in Europe, particularly, and obviously around the globe. I've written down a few questions that I really wanted to ask, particularly because of your knowledge. So we're going to start with the first one. The world is currently dealing with probably the worst pandemic in a generation. The coronavirus has caused lockdown in countries such as China and Italy and more, with such an unprecedented event unfolding. What will be the ramifications for the sportswear industry going forward over the next weeks and months?
So it's a very, very good question. What we saw initially was in China, where this started, where a lot of the manufacturing facilities are, more so Vietnam now than China, but because this is where products are being manufactured, more apparel than sneakers now in China, people were worried that you might start to not see some of the product coming out of China or out of Asia and hitting the stores and shelves across the globe. Because this started in Lunar New Year, the factories were going to close down for 3 weeks anyway. So what we found is that people pre-order in anticipation of that. So we had a couple of extra weeks bolted on the back that meant sort of elongated closures, if you like, but people had pre-ordered. So it transpires that the hit hasn't been quite as bad as people might have feared. Now, what we've heard from the likes of Adidas, Nike, Puma, etc., is that these manufacturing facilities are getting back to some kind of normality, and the impact has been pretty minimal. But so what about now, fast forwarding to us seeing the impact in the US as well as Europe, because now they're saying that Europe is the epicenter of the coronavirus. So what's important now is that it's gone from a supply issue to a demand issue. So whereas we need the infrastructure to be in place to be able to get the stuff onto boats and over to Europe, etc. With news that places like Italy are shutting down, sort of having a complete lockdown. Spain are as well. We've had Switzerland announce today that they're going to be shutting sort of non-key stores, if you like. Germany are discussing it as well. You've suddenly now got this problem that the demand aspect is going to be a bit more of an issue. People are being forced to self-isolate. People are being forced to stay inside. So your footfall numbers are going to be slashed. You've had people like Nike are coming out and saying they're actually shutting all their stores in North America. They're shutting stores in Europe. We've heard the same from Abercrombie and Fitch. We've heard the same from Levi's. A lot of these companies are really going full hog and making sure that they're protecting their staff because it's their brand reputation at stake. And this is obviously something that's very, very important in this day and age. I've been asked about online and whether that can replace some of the lost sales from an in-store perspective. That's fine, but one, when people are self-isolating and worried about where their next food maybe is going to come from, or the availability of that, they might not necessarily be thinking, oh, and by the way, I must rush out and get a pair of trainers. Similarly, if there's more lockdowns, you're going to find that infrastructure isn't quite in place as it was, which can then stop online stores, online orders being fulfilled. So they're just a few things that we need to bear in mind, that we've gone from a potential supply issue in China that's now fast forwarded to a demand issue outside of China in the rest of Asia, as well as in the US and in Europe.
So will we likely see releases then pushed back, potentially maybe even cancelled because of this situation? And do these major sports brands have contingencies if such a situation was to happen, where their production supplies are constrained?
Okay, so with regards to are we going to see delays to some releases, there have been, I've seen there's been a couple of delays to some of the Jordan releases that are coming up. I haven't heard of any real high profile stuff, but the lead time on a lot of these shoes is quite long, as in they are manufactured out in China. It takes some weeks for them to come on a boat, etc. So I think a lot of what we're seeing at the moment is what would have already been planned, already been manufactured, and was already in the pipeline. It will be interesting to see going forward if there are any sort of specific delays that are sort of stuff in the pipeline. As things stand at the moment, like I say, there's been a couple of Jordan releases that I think have been pushed back, but other than that, there's nothing much. What I would say though is that the brands are obviously going to be very, very aware that whether there's in-store pickups, etc., are being cancelled, stores could be closed, that again, the infrastructure issue of being able to deliver online orders, these are all things that brands are going to take into consideration when they're launching their products. So it's definitely something we need to be keeping up and keeping aware of in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, just to add to that, literally as of yesterday, I believe that the Jordan Dior collaboration has been placed on hold. Something that is quite a coveted, limited release. Now, it's not obviously because of supply or anything like that. It's just genuinely, I presume, that Dior don't want to put people at risk, so they are going to push it back. But yeah, thanks for that, Andy. Next question is, with supply going to be affected, obviously not just in the sportswear industry but in retail across the board, are we likely to see companies express these difficulties to provide products and services to clients and consumers? Do they tend to show a positive outlook to keep shareholders happy?
So with regards to making sure it's sort of business as usual for these retailers, and obviously those that are listed need to make sure that the shareholders are kept abreast of what's going on to be able to keep those guys happy, because as we've seen in the stock market generally, we've had some astronomical falls, and the share price, some of these share prices are getting absolutely smashed to pieces. It's a balancing act. I think in some of these instances you don't necessarily want to, if you don't know an outcome, it's fine to say that you don't know, but be aware that investors, when they can't factor something in, they tend to catastrophize and they can tend to make things a worst case scenario. So initially we had Puma, were one of the first early companies that come out and started commenting on COVID-19, and they said it was going to be a short-term issue. They've since a few weeks later have backtracked on that, withdrawn that, and said actually this is going to be more of a medium term issue, and it's going to be around a longer and more of an issue for longer. It's important legally that these companies have to, if they know something, if it's materially different from what was expected, they have to let the stock market know, they have to let shareholders know, they have to put out official releases. So whilst what they want to do is business as usual, they have to, by law, update the market if there's certainly something that's different to that. The fact that if you're a high street retailer that's got exposure in Europe, that you're probably having your stores forced to be closed, you're telling people that they might be able to work from home, that could be people in head office, you're going to have delays to processing online stuff. These guys have to be honest about this.
So will they make provisions for it, do you think?
They will make provisions for it, financial provisions, but their hands are pretty much tied with regards to the physicality of getting stuff. If the stores are shut and stuff can't get through, they literally have to just be as honest as possible, as brutal as possible, and ultimately end up guiding down their numbers because they're not going to be able to fulfil what they originally thought with regards to sales.
And do we think there's that potential that these companies are not going to be able to provide to their customers, clients, and because of that fact, the side effect is potentially that we could go into a whole new recession?
So the recession question is very, very interesting. We have seen governments and central banks across the globe touting large numbers, monetary numbers of aid to be able to help things. I think the likelihood of us going into a recession after this is very, very high. We have to think about, and I'm now thinking not just from sneakers obviously, but we have to think of the implications to all walks of life, all industries. If you work in airlines, for instance, we've had the airlines are slashing their capacity by between sort of 70 and 90%. Virgin have asked some of their staff to take 8 weeks unpaid leave. If you take 8 weeks unpaid leave, the chances are you are not going to be rushing out and buying some purchases that you may have done before. The first things first is you're going to be paying for your mortgage, your car, food, mobile phone, this sort of stuff. So there causes a problem there. If you have people having to self-isolate, you're getting people taken away from their jobs. If they're medical profession and they're getting taken away from their jobs, then that makes the whole problem worse in hospitals, etc. So the governments and central banks around the world are doing what they can to make sure banks have got liquidity. Banks are talking about extending overdrafts. They're talking about foregoing, let's say, if people can't pay their mortgage, or if you're a business and you can't pay back some of your rates, etc. They are doing what they can to be able to cushion this blow. But the danger is the ramifications are so far and wide-reaching, and we still don't know exactly how it's going to affect Europe and the US, that there is some potential for some significant nastiness on the economic side to come.
So we did speak a little bit earlier on about store closures and stuff like that, and obviously with Nike deciding that they're going to close their stores for a number of weeks, Apple doing exactly the same as well, and obviously more to come. What are your thoughts to that? And I suppose in some ways, will that potentially lead down a path where these stores may not be required anymore, and physical stores are seen as maybe not required to online shopping? Like, I suppose it's a difficult question to ask, and I know you've already gone over a little bit, but what are your thoughts?
Question about stores being forced to close is an interesting one. We've initially started to see stores being forced to close in places like Italy, Spain, where they've had a forced curfews and shutdown, if you like. And that starts with things obviously like restaurants, bars, and this is all business that these guys are going to lose. You're not going to suddenly go out for 10 dinners for 10 nights in a row because you couldn't go out for dinners for the last 10 weeks. There's implications there. And the stores, as we saw in China during the initial shutdowns, when it was rampant over there, the stores were closed, and any stores that were open were seeing hugely reduced footfall. But what we've started to see now, it's spreading to the US and to Western Europe, is that some of these global brands are forcefully shutting stores in countries that aren't necessarily seeing forced closures. They're saying they're protecting their employees, which is great. It's very important. Their brand name, if you like, is at risk if they don't do the right things here. So whether it's Nike, Levi's, Abercrombie and Fitch, you've had lots of companies that have come out already, and I would expect that with these big companies coming out and saying that, the likelihood is you're going to see most major multinational companies, retailers, if you like, that are not supplying stuff that's specific to do with food, day-to-day stuff, whether it's healthcare, etc. They will be saying something similar. So you've still got online, which is great, but you still need people to be processing the online orders. So that becomes a bit of an issue if you're telling some staff they don't have to work, but others, they do have to work. You're presuming also that online orders can be fulfilled as long as you've got the infrastructure in place and places aren't shut down to the extent that you can't get stuff actually through. Will this change shopping habits? It's an interesting one because the social distancing stuff will, I think, disappear fairly quickly. If we think back to SARS, MERS, swine flu, bird flu, Ebola, I know we weren't sort of hit hard with a lot of those. They're all stuff that's been talked about in the past, quite big epidemics, or at least pandemics, and they have disappeared pretty much. We've talked about them and we've moved on from them. But shopping habits may well change a little going forward from this. With regards to will retailers see bricks and mortar being less important? I think you have, the high street's been a tough place for a long time. The fact that those that are doing well, for instance, JD Sports, Next, for instance, I've just picked 2 UK retailers, is because they've got the right branch networks. They're maximising them in the right way. You can pick up parcels. I'm pretty sure it's Amazon parcels you can pick up inside Next stores now, but Next have nailed the click and collect. It's all about having the right setup, using your stores that are in the right place to maximise your offering to your client base, if you like. The other thing that they've also been looking at more recently is you've had sort of the Foot Locker power stores, etc., where they're actually wanting to build a community around sneakers and sneaker sales. It's not just a case of going in, buying a pair of sneakers, thank you very much, and then you go away again. What they want to do is they want to create an environment where people can congregate, where you can have, there might be the ability to go and play online games, whether it's simulators, whether you've got a live DJ, whether you've got customizing areas and all things like this. So the store is very, very important, but you have to make sure your stores are in the right place and are geared up to make the right offering, really.
Because so many people are going to have to self-isolate over the next few weeks, months, we just don't know. There seems to be this potential that businesses are going to go bust, basically. Do you see any sportswear brands that could be in danger? Or do you just see there be the potential for a lot of job losses? What's your thoughts?
So the question with regards to working from home and what the impact that's going to have on businesses as a whole is an interesting one. I actually think the work from home attitude is going to change after this. I think you're going to see the ability for a lot more people to be able to work from home going forward. So actually that could be a positive thing that we take from what's going on at the moment. But with regards to stores, store closures, dropping in footfall, etc., are we going to see some businesses cease trading? Are we going to see job losses? We already know, and we've been told there are going to be job losses in industries such as airlines. British Airways have already unfortunately come out and said that, and there's going to be others. As I said, Virgin Atlantic have asked for people to take unpaid leave. I think the alternative to that would probably be, if you can't do that, there might be some inevitable job losses. You're going to see job losses and businesses potentially go under in the hospitality space, restaurants, bars, etc. If we're looking at the big boys, if you like, there's not so many, some of the small independent retailers, some of the skate shops, etc. They're really, really important that we don't forget these guys, because as we've seen with some of the recent Nike SB drops, they've done a fantastic job of managing these sales, and it's a hugely important part of our industry, of people being able to go and talk with other people that are enthused about skateboarding, etc., etc. If I take a step away from that and look at the big retailers, whether it's Nike, Adidas, Puma stores, so their DTC stuff, whether it's online or actually selling their own stuff, or whether you've got Foot Locker, Foot Asylum, JD Sports, Size, they're all attached to, quite a few of them are attached to JD Sports. You've got Sports Direct. I can't see any of those big guys going out of business personally. I can't see a Nike, an Adidas, a Puma. I can't see any of them going out of business. Will there be job losses? Potentially. But I think that if it's a wholesale brand that's going in the right direction, like a Foot Locker, like a JD Sports, and they are pushing this new store format, etc., and really trying to push this community feel, I'm hopeful that there can be minimal job losses, but these are unprecedented times for the last couple of generations. So I think we're in uncharted territory, and we need to see how the land lies after all this sort of settles down. But it's hopefully, if there are any job losses, it can be sort of kept to the minimum.
So this is something that was actually asked to me by someone that follows me on Instagram, and if you aren't aware that I've got an Instagram, I do. All the info about my YouTube channel, Instagram, and any of the social accounts will be down below. But the question was, do you think this situation will have any effect on resale of sneakers, the resellers of these particular sneakers, and companies like StockX and consignment stores? Will they potentially see a hit? Because obviously less people are going to have like money in their pockets. People will be maybe less inclined to have these, spur of the moment purchases. This is something that I can imagine will be quite a big deal. So really, really keen to hear what you think.
A question on resellers, consignment stores. It's a very, very interesting. We see at the moment a hell of a lot of resale and some crazy, stupid resale prices. I think what we need to look at for this instance is that there is protected wealth, and then there is, which is vast in numbers but small in the amount of people that have that, and there is unprotected wealth, which is pretty much everyone else that's working day to day and has to go to work, etc. Now, if you were to look at something like Presented By in the West End, some of the prices of their shoes, they aren't aimed at just a normal punter that's going to go in and buy a pair of shoes. They're aimed at super rich individuals. I would imagine that those guys are still going to have plenty of money. But I would say is that with the oil price falling to the extent that it has, even the oil-rich sort of Arab states, etc., those guys are going to be feeling the pinch because that oil price has absolutely plummeted. Currently trading, the New York WTI crude is currently trading about $30 a barrel when it was above $50 a barrel before all of this. There's also been a price war going on between Russia and Saudi Arabia, but that's something completely separate. You've got demand. With a slowdown in the global economy, you have demand of oil also drops off, which is why you're seeing the oil price come down so much. So some of that protected wealth might start to feel a bit of a squeeze, but some of these guys have got so much money, it's almost it's unfathomable for most of us. Will it have an impact on StockX? Well, what I actually think is going to happen is you're going to have people again, are not going to be looking at a pair of shoes online on their cell phone, their smartphone, and going and spending £500-600 on multiple pairs of trainers. Now, if there's an absolute grail that someone's been saving up for, then possibly that might still be a transaction that happens. But this is going to cause people to rethink a lot of things. I expect people to be tightening their purse strings quite significantly because, as I said, job loss potential is real. You might suddenly be worrying, has your supermarket got the right food that you want? As opposed to in the past, you know that if you want to go and get something, it would be on sale in your supermarket, you get it dirt cheap, and you can just worry about, are you going to be able to get the right trainers that you want? So I think it will have an effect on resale. I don't think it's necessarily going to cause prices of trainers to plummet, nor do I suddenly think that trainers are going to be seen as a great store of value because the stock market has fallen to the extent that it has. I think you will probably see a tick easier in some of the prices as the demand, the ability for people, the wider audience to be able to pay for these sorts of shoes is diminished for the time being before we can try and get through this, get back onto an even keel and actually get back to some kind of normality and sort of earning our normal wages again without worry of where the next bit of food's going to come from, etc.
So finally, all I can really say is that I really appreciate everything that you've said so far. Is there anything else that potentially needs to be covered that may be worth noting to give us all a better idea of where the sneaker industry is going to be in 2020 and beyond?
In regards to what I see happening with the sneaker industry in 2020 and going forward, obviously we've still got this tricky period to get through. This period is causing manufacturers and retailers to rethink how they do things, make sure their offerings are bulletproof. They will adapt to this situation, but hopefully this situation that we're seeing ourselves in at the moment isn't something that we're going to have to live with for a prolonged period of time. The likelihood of this is that we don't know how long this is going to last, but let's fast forward to the flu season in this coming winter. Hopefully a vaccine will be available. Hopefully that will be put into flu vaccinations for the elderly and the most at risk. So hopefully this will just be then deemed as a nasty flu, but we've got it under control. So assuming that's the case, companies will have made sure that their whole straight through process coming from manufacture right the way through to how they're delivering products and how they're being presented is probably going to be looked at quite carefully and make sure it's more bulletproof than it was before. So whilst I hope that we're not going to see another medical shock like this again in the next couple of years, I think it will help businesses to shape up and make sure that everything is as bulletproof as it can be. Unfortunately, the recessionary side of it for the globe, if you like, is going to take time to unravel it or to unwind again and things to be able to pick up. The sorts of money that these central banks and governments are throwing at ensuring that banks have got the right money to lend and that businesses don't go bust. It's very, very important. It's going to take time for that all to unravel again and us to get back to some kind of normality. So there could be some demand impact on additional spending, luxury items, etc., etc. But people, whilst they're tightening the purse strings, they are at least going to need some kind of trainer purchases. If we're looking at Nike, Adidas, and the day-to-day lifeblood of these companies, it could be Nike Tangents from Sports Direct, Downshifter 7s, all these sorts of stuff that people buy in their absolute droves because they want a black pair of Nikes. They're still going to be being purchased, but rest assured, this is going to hit people right the way from the top end of top earners, right the way through to people on 0 hours contracts, etc. So I could definitely see a tightening of purse strings. It will be interesting to see, obviously, gatherings. Today the US have been announcing, and state by state they've been coming out with it, that they are for the short term banning gatherings of over 50 people, just 50 people, which is incredible. We're going to see those unravel, and obviously I would hopefully assume that these are going to be taken off, and people will be able to get together again in larger numbers.
Do you see there being a potential for a lot of sneaker events that are coming up being affected?
So things like Crep City coming up, Laces Out in May. There's going to be obviously a few others that are coming up. Are those all going to be at risk, if you like? There's a likelihood, yes, but the community is connected day to day online. So I can't see this being necessarily a huge game changer. People are still going to be able to get in contact. People are still going to be sharing photos of their trainers. People are still going to be, getting excited about hype releases. And as I said at the beginning of the interview, whilst there have been some delays evident in some of the Jordan silhouettes, hopefully those delays are minimal. We're certainly hearing of little disruption when it comes to the manufacturing chain from the big names themselves. So hopefully the impact elsewhere will be relatively minimum. Hopefully that answers the questions. Thank you very much. If you've got any other additional questions you want to, please do feel free to give me a shout. I'm Andy Wilson, _sneaker dog. On Instagram. Please feel free to give me a shout and ask any questions that you want. And Ty, thank you very much again for having me on this little Q&A. I hope it's all been helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for speaking to me, Andy. Really do appreciate it. I know you're really busy and it's not exactly the best circumstance to finally collab on a video. So at least some people out there are going to have a better understanding of what the future may hold for the sportswear industry and retail as a whole, what may be the case for all of us when it comes to earning money, and hopefully if people do struggle, then there will be maybe some support through the banks and the government. Fingers crossed that's how it will be. We'll only find out with more announcements going on in the future. And other than that, everything that you've given us is just more insight into what is going to be our 2020 and beyond. Thank you again, and don't forget to follow _sneaker dog. All his info will be in the description down below. Thank you, Andy, really appreciate it. And that was Tie Kicks for this week. Hopefully next week we can do something a little bit more interesting and a little bit less, shall we say, COVID-19. But for now, please look after yourselves, please look after your loved ones, and take care, and I'll speak to you again on another one.